Welcome, everybody. Hope you had a chance to get a little break in between sessions. My name's Stacy Davis. I'm with the Missouri Department of Conservation here in Kansas City, and hopefully you are signed in to watch the Hope and Collaboration landscape level engagement for monarchs and pollinators. I'm super excited about this one with the kind of the peak time of monarchs in Kansas City right now. Just got me all excited. As we get started through today's program, don't forget to use the chat on the right hand side of your screen. Throw in any comments, any questions that you have for the speaker. And as we get to the end of the presentation, we'll try to work through all of those questions that you have there. So now I'd like to welcome Christine Sanderson. She is going to be presenting the Hope and Collaboration session. Christine is the Associate Director for the Monarch Joint Venture, supporting the program team working on science, education, and habitat initiatives for monarchs and pollinators across the U.S. Born and raised in central Wisconsin, she's worked with nonprofits and social enterprises across the United States and in Central America. She spent a number of years in Guatemala working in experiential social justice education and community-based development. Christine has a BA in Spanish and music and earned a master's in education in environmental education from the Western Washington University. So welcome, Christine.
Hi, and thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for that great introduction. Like we mentioned, this is the Hope in Collaboration, and we're going to be talking about landscape level engagement for monarchs and pollinators. And I work for the Monarch Joint Venture. So to give you an overview of our plan for today, we're going to start with a little bit of monarch biology and understanding their migration. Just as an overview, I know some of you probably already have this information, but to get us all on the same page, that's where we're going to start. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the current population status, some of the collective conservation goals, and also a little bit about the current Endangered Species Act listing process that we're in for monarchs, and then move into that topic of hope and really thinking about what does that look like when we collaborate with others. And so we'll do that by talking about the Monarch Joint Venture and how we really see strengths in partnership as being a huge part of that. And of course, there'll be time at the end for Q&A. So to start with our life cycle, monarchs all start an egg, and there's actually two examples on this slide here. We've got one egg on the other underside of a leaf. The egg stage in monarchs is about 1 to 5 days, and a wild female monarch butterfly lays an average of up to 500 eggs in their lifetime. They do that because there's only a survival rate of about 5 to 10% from that egg being laid to making it all the way to adulthood as a butterfly. So that's why they need to lay so many. And the monarch will usually only lay 1 egg per plant. You might see 2 if the adult comes through, lays a bunch of eggs, can't find more milkweed, they might come back, or they might be from another monarch coming through. But they're pretty voracious eaters, caterpillars, and so you don't want too many on a plant at a time. Which brings us to the next stage. So this is our friend, the caterpillar, munching away on a milkweed leaf. So milkweed is the only host plant for monarch caterpillars. It's the only plant on which the adult will lay their eggs because it's the only plant that the caterpillar will eat. And eat, they do. A caterpillar from the time that it hatches from the egg and to the time where it's going to become a chrysalis, which is the next stage, can grow up to 2,000 times the original size. And so that takes a lot of milkweed to go through to make it to that point. And that would be in comparison having a human baby growing to the size of an adult elephant in 10 to 14 days. So pretty incredible, the transformation that takes place over that time period. And the caterpillars will also go through 5 different phases. They're called instars, and in between each instar, they will molt or shed their skin so they can grow a little bit bigger. After that 5th instar, they're going to find somewhere to hang upside down, form a J shape, and then become a chrysalis. So they'll be in this chrysalis stage for 9 to 14 days. This is an example of a really beautiful jade dots on the chrysalis. So all Daenids, so that's a genus of butterfly whose larvae only eat milkweed, have an amazing array of metallic coloration during the chrysalis stage. There's a few ideas as to why that might be the case, but we don't really know. But it is a really beautiful part that I love to point out. Another thing to notice here is that this chrysalis is on a rock. And so what caterpillars, unless they don't have any other options, will often not make their chrysalis on a milkweed plant. They want to go somewhere else. I've seen them on the sides of buildings. I've seen them under decks. I've seen them on stumps. This is a great example here on a rock. And so if you see a caterpillar, and especially one that's big, it's in that 5th instar stage. And I don't have time to go through all the instars, but this guy has these long tentacles that are way to curl under. So that tells me this is a 5th instar. He's getting pretty ready to make his chrysalis. If I crawling away from that milkweed plant, I don't want to touch him. Back to the milkweed. He knows where he's going. He's finding somewhere to make his chrysalis. And after about 2 weeks in that stage, they're going to emerge as the adult butterfly. So adult butterflies in the summer can live for 2 to 6 weeks. And then there is a migrating generation that lives longer. When they come out of the chrysalis, they will nectar or get fuel from many different types of plants. So while we do want milkweed and native milkweed species all over the landscape for them to lay their eggs and for the caterpillars, we also want a large variety of native blooming nectar species for the adult monarchs. And we need ones that are going to bloom in the early spring all the way through the fall. And in this picture here, the monarch is on a purple liatris or liatris flower, depending on how you pronounce it, also sometimes referred to as a blazing star. And there's many different varieties of the liatris, and there's different types that are native to different areas of the country, but they're a great late blooming nectar plant to have in your garden for monarchs, for them to fuel up on their journey to their overwintering sites. So as I said, there's about 4 to 5 generations every summer. The first 4 are usually the breeding monarchs, the ones that live for 2 to 6 weeks. The last generation, and that's probably what you're seeing right now, if you're somewhere where you see monarchs, that's going to be our migrating generation. And those monarchs can live for up to 9 months. And the reason for that is because they do not reproduce. So they emerge from a chrysalis in a state called reproductive diapause. Now, that's a very fancy way of saying that their ability to reproduce is put on pause, because reproduction takes a lot of energy. And so by not being able to do that right away, they can extend their life and go on that incredible journey to overwinter. So right now we're starting the fall migration for monarchs. There's actually 2 populations of monarchs, and they're divided by the rocks. So they have their breeding area all throughout the western. This 5th is what we're seeing emerge right now, what you might be seeing flying overhead. And it's pretty incredible because the eastern monarchs can fly up to 1,000 miles to reach their overwintering sites. The western monarchs can, and the eastern monarchs can travel up to 3,000 miles all the way down to Mexico. And now keep in mind that the last monarchs to be in this place were either the great-great-grandparents or the great-great-great-grandparents of the current generation. So it's a little bit of a mystery as to how these monarchs know how to go back to the very specific place. It's kind of a Goldilocks place in terms of the perfect climate and microclimate and temperature. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. It's the perfect overwintering climate for them. And how they know how to go back there is, like I said, a bit of a mystery. We know that they navigate a little bit due to the sun, and potentially maybe they're looking for some land features on the landscape, but we also don't understand that it's in its entirety also. So they're pretty incredible. They'll overwinter in those spots from November till about March. In March, they'll start breeding and making. For those on the West Coast, they're going to start. Now that's a little bit of the way and milkweed. So if you are this year having early emerging native milkweeds as populations. And so they're going to find somewhere to lay there, and then that whole process is going to start all over again, where that next generation will be born. They'll continue to migrate a little bit for their kind of leapfrogging over each other in their generation, until that final all over again. So when they're in their summer breeding areas, it's really hard to get an accurate count of how many monarchs are in the landscape because they're so spread out. If I go back a slide, just a reminder, they all around North America, and so it's so hard to count that many monarchs. To get our population, we can actually count them at their overwintering sites. And I think I'm going to try turning my camera off to see if that helps a little bit here. Give me just 1 minute. All right. So we're giving that a try, and hopefully you'll be able to hear me a little bit better. So our overwintering sites is where we count the monarchs. And these are a graph of the population site in Mexico. And in Mexico, we actually measure them in area, so covered by monarchs, because there are so many, and we count them in hectares. So 1 hectare is 2.5 acres. And you can see that there are, this is pretty common for insects to have boom and bust cycles. Remember back to that, the beginning, we were talking about a monarch can lay up to 500 eggs, but there's a survival rate of 5 to 10%. So depending on how all of that shakes out, you might have more or less. Trend. And so that could be so what we've done is take a mean every year. So you can see that the mean is the average, and so in the 1990s, the mean 0.6 hectares. In the early 2000s, it was 5.86 hectares. The 2010s were down to 2.6 hectares. And scientists have estimated that we need at least 6 hectares of overwintering monarchs to maintain a sustainable population. So what we've done is we're working together to come up with these community goals to try to help eastern monarchs. The first one, that 6 hectare target monarchs, and then we are going to try 0.8 billion milkweed stems to the landscape, and specifically 0.3 billion in the Midwest. So one of the ideas is that the major concern or one of the major constraints for monarchs is the lack of habitat and the lack of breeding habitat. So we really need to boost that up in North America. And if you're interested, there are specific state milkweed and Mid-America monarch conservation strategy, which was put out by the Midwest Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. So you can check that out. And overall, we're trying to restore 1 million acres of pollinator habitat across all regions and all land use. These are some pretty lofty goals. Then we get into monarchs in the West, and this is the number of overwintering monarchs in California. Because there are fewer in the West, we can actually count individual monarchs. It is a pretty substantial effort by community scientists to go out to all of the known overwintering sites and hand count with binoculars individual monarchs. But this graph is showing us the bars here in green are how individual monarchs were counted. So you can see in 1997, we had 1.2 million. Last winter, so this is the winter of 2021 to 22, we had 100,000. So it's a big change. And then this blue line is charting the number of sites that have been heard. So what we're seeing is that as the number of monarchs are going down, we are actually over more sites. I specifically want to point out the last 2 years of that, which are a little bit concerning. In 2020 to 2021, we counted only 1,900 individual monarchs at all of the overwintering sites. That was a really scary year. We're pretty lucky. We got pretty lucky to see that number has reached almost 200,000 last year. And you might be asking that question, well, what happened? What's the difference? And we've talked to a number of scientists who focus on researching Western monarchs, and two of the phrases that really stick out to me are the bounciness of butterflies, right? Those boom and bust cycles that happen with insects. That this can happen where you can have a low year and then a high year. But the challenge with that is that you can have a high year and then it can just drop just as much the next year. And when we talk about, well, what happened here from 2020 to 2021, another researcher has called this a series of fortunate events. So a lot of things went right. A lot of things could just as easily go wrong. So in the same sense that we have these community targets for Eastern monarchs, we also have them for Western monarchs. So here we are looking at, the 5-year running average butterflies. We want to be at 500,000 overwintering monarchs. We want to have 50% of overwintering sites protected. And we are hoping to add an additional fears of habitat in California's Central Valley and the adjacent foothills. And that's a really important area for getting habitat on the ground. So with all of this coming out, it's also been happening at the same time that there's been the process for Endangered Species Act listing that has been going on. It started back in 2014. It is a slow process. This is a process specific to the United States. And in 2020, it was announced that monarchs are considered for listing. That listing is a warrant. And what that means is that yes, their species status means that they probably should be listed, but there are multiple species that really need to be listed. And because we don't have enough resources to list them all at once, we need to prioritize. And so they're on the list. They're in kind of this middle ground called candidate species. And so that's where they are right now, and they're projecting to have a final ruling in fiscal year 2024. And basically they've said that if nothing changes in their population, if there isn't a drastic increase in population, that monarchs should expect to be listed in 2024. This would come with federal protections and regulations. We don't know exactly what those would be yet. Those would come out with the final ruling. And just as a side note, there was an announcement made this summer that the IUCN, or International Union for the Conservation of Nature, has added monarchs to their red list and to their endangered species list. This is a completely different process, although it goes through the same rigorous status assessment of the population. They're two different listings, and the IUCN listing doesn't come with any regulatory actions or protections. So this is the point where I want to take a quick step back. I have just told you many, many facts that can be considered quite depressing, right? Our monarch population numbers are going down. We are potentially on the brink of losing, at the very least, the migratory population, especially the population in the West. Our goals are so lofty that they might seem unattainable. It's hard to fathom 1.8 billion of anything, much less of individual stems or milkweed plants. We're talking about millions of acres of habitat that need to get added to the landscape. And so what I want to remind us of is, this isn't just a challenge when we're talking about monarch conservation. It comes to play when we're talking about all kinds of challenging topics, whether that is species decline, habitat loss, climate change, environmental justice. It can be really challenging when we work in this field to maintain optimism and hope. But my reminder is, that the minute that we decide it isn't possible, we've sealed our fates. And so we have to find the things that give us hope. And for me, it is that there is incredible collaboration happening across sectors, across industries, across state and international boundaries. And that's what gives me hope and gives me hope for monarchs. And this isn't all just theoretical. So I want to start first by talking about an all hands on deck paper, that's what it's called, that came out by Wayne Thogmartin et al. In 2017. And these scientists took a step back and they said, okay, we've figured out what we want our targets to be. We need 1.8 billion milkweed stems on the landscape. Is that even feasibly possible? Can we do it? And the answer is yes. They ran the models and they found 2 different ways that it could be possible. This is our lovely model here. And the first way that they found they could do this is if every single acre of marginal agricultural land in the entire range of the eastern monarch was converted into pollinator habitat. We had 100% adoption. We could reach these targets. Unfortunately, I think we know anything that requires 100% adoption is pretty unrealistic. And so they ran the models again. And the other way that they did it is if we have all hands on deck, if we have significant buy-in from ag lands, rights of way, developed lands, public lands, conservation lands, if we have significant buy-in, and there still has to be a bigger role by agriculture, but across all of these industries, and we have all hands on deck, we can do this. And that's something for me that's pretty exciting to know that if we do collaborate, we can make this happen. And there's a lot of collaboration happening already. So that brings us to the Monarch joint venture model. So our mission is to protect monarchs and their migration by collaborating with partners to deliver habitat, education, and science across the United States. And so we do have these program areas of habitation and all revolve around partnership and around people. And I think some of you can probably attest that it's pretty incredible. The more that you get into the conservation world, you think it's going to be all about the plants and animals, but 9 times out of 10, it is about the people. And we really see collaboration and collaborative partnerships and voluntary conservation efforts as a way that we can achieve these really lofty goals. So as an organization, we have over 120 partners. Across the United States. And I'm getting a notification that I'm having connection issues. Let's see if someone can tell me if that's true. I think we're back. So we have over, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We could hear you. It was kind of cutting out just a bit, but it wasn't bad when you were having connection issues.
All right. Well, I'll just keep going then. Sounds good. Hopefully the video off is helpful. Sorry, everyone. So this slide is representing our 120 partners and growing across the United States that are all a part of the Monarch joint venture. And these partners range from 1 or 2 people-run organizations all the way up to government agencies and everything in between. And they're all doing their part for monarchs and pollinators, and they're engaging within their sphere of influence. And really the support of many organizations is what is making this possible. So the role that MJV plays in all of this is that we're a connector and convener. We try to be an information clearinghouse and a curator of tools and resources so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If we all start from scratch to figure out what do we need to do for monarchs and pollinators, we wouldn't get very far. And so it's about streamlining those, connecting people to one another, and helping them do the great work that they can do in their community, whatever size community that is. And then within this network of partnerships, there is networks within networks. So first we'll talk about state and local collaborations. And so we see a lot of partners that work at the state level. So Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative, Missourians for Monarchs, Wisconsin Monarch Collaborative. They're really looking at, okay, how can we take all of the organizations within our state that are working for monarchs and help them connect to one another, help them streamline resources, make sure that we know what our targets are, make sure that that information is being shared. And then we also see collaborations across states, and that's how we get things like the Western Monarch Butterfly Conservation Plan and the Mid-America Monarch Conservation Plan, which is really bringing together multiple states to figure out what we need to do in collaboration. And then we also have city projects like the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. So if you haven't already, you can check out whether your mayor is participating in the Mayor's Monarch. If they are not, you can give them a call, write them an email, say they should do it. It's really just pledging to take at least 3 positive actions for your community. And then we also have sector and audience-based collaboration. And what I think is so exciting about this is that we're reaching across collaborations. We're reaching across industries that often haven't collaborated with conservation, or maybe they have, but not as much as some other areas. And so we're actively engaged in Farmers for Monarchs. Like I said, agriculture needs to be a huge part of this conversation. They need to be at the table. They're a part of the solution. And actually, our habitat initiatives are directly related to putting habitat in on agricultural land. And that's a really incredible group. There's also Youth for Monarchs and the North American Monarch Institute, which is doing education across country lines. The Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group is working with rights of way, so along roadsides and energy sectors, to talk about how habitat could be implemented there. And then the AZA, Association of Zoos and Aquariums, looking at what can we do from a zoo perspective to support monarchs and pollinators. And all of these groups in some way, shape, or form do talk to one another, especially because we participate in as many of these as we possibly can, and then are bringing those conversations back so we can make sure that there's connection and collaboration. And finally, we also have international cooperation. So while the Monarch Joint Venture is a US-based nonprofit organization and our partners are based in the United States, we collaborate with organizations across North America because Eastern monarchs in particular have that incredible 3,000-mile range all the way from Southern Canada down to Mexico. So North American Monarch Institute educators, which I mentioned earlier, there is the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. These folks up here, everything is produced in English, Spanish, and French to really engage in that collaborative efforts. And there's also collaboration from governments in Canada, the US, and Mexico. So 2 fun examples of this is that there is an International Monarch Monitoring Blitz, which is a tri-national effort to bring community scientists from all 3 countries together and go out and count monarchs for a 1-week stint during their summer breeding period. So like I said, we don't have a great way to count the population in the summer. And so this is one attempt to do it tri-nationally. That's a wonderful opportunity for you all to get involved with if you're interested. And then this one, it's a little bit old now, but I still love it. Back in 2020, US Talk, which brought together the lead of the US, Canada, and Mexico. They were talking about climate, they were talking about defense, they couldn't agree on anything. The one thing they did agree on is that there should be collaborative efforts for the monarch butterfly. So on one hand, that is a little sad that was our only point of like true agreement, but also pretty cool to think about how monarchs can bring people together across political lines as well. And I will leave with this image of the monarch. We call this our monarch ambassador, and it's an image of a monarch butterfly dissolving into these other pollinators and plants. And it's this idea of what we do for monarchs has incredible ripple effects and has the ability to have a positive impact on the landscape and on healthy ecosystems. So as much as we want to protect monarchs for their own intrinsic value, we also can use monarchs as a rallying cry. They are a flagship. They are the charismatic microfauna instead of the charismatic megafauna. And everyone knows a monarch. Everyone loves a monarch. And so if we can get people on board, think of that Three Amigos talk. If we can get 3 heads of 3 different countries to gather around the monarch, what can that allow us to do? And that's also where I see hope. There is hope in this work. There is hope in the work that you're doing. And I see that every single day in the collaborations that I get to witness and I get to help be a part of. And so I would encourage you to remember that hope and also think about what role can you play in this, whether that's planting milkweed and planting nectar plants. Maybe that's getting involved in a community science project, perhaps for the Blitz. Maybe it's calling your mayor and getting them to sign the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, or just going to our website and learning more. There's hope and there's work that we can all do. So thank you very much. I'll take any questions that we have.
Nice, Christine. I love that the butterfly graphic there on that last slide. Beautiful. Actually, you might be able to go ahead and turn your camera back on since the other part's not playing. Try it out. All right. And I do have a few questions for you.
Yeah, I'm going to try to close out of my...
Okay. And while you do that, I'll give folks a few more seconds to enter in their questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see if my video is working. You can tell me to turn it back off again if we need to.
All right. For now, it sits there, so we're good. We'll work with it. So first one, I'll start off with kind of an easy question that Julie has for you, and that is, what's the criteria for membership of the Monarch joint venture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing that I would do, and I'm still seeing freezing, so I'm just going to pop my video off again and see if that helps us. But we have official partners with organizations. And so we have people in our network that are individuals, whether that's farmers and landowners and teachers and educators, but we're specifically partnering with organizations. Those can be private organizations, they can be nonprofits, they can be government or state agencies, anything along that line. And what we're really looking for is that it's an organization that wants to support monarchs and pollinators. It doesn't have to be your main focus. And in fact, if you're going, we want to do more for monarchs, but we don't know where to start, that's a great partner that we want to work with. So you can learn more on our website, monarchjointventure.org, and you can also reach out to us. And I will pull up the address for our partnership coordinator and pop that into the private chat, and maybe that can go onto the chat as well for anyone that wants it.
Sure. All right. And Tammy had a question. She says that recently there was news that milkweed from various nurseries were all found to have pesticides that were toxic to monarchs. How do we work to keep these chemicals out of growing nurseries?
That's a great question, and it's a really tough one. The number one thing that I want to get across is, while pesticides aren't great, do not let the studies stop you from buying native plants and planting them. We also know that, while it's not ideal, some low levels of pesticides on a milkweed plant and having that plant there is better than having no milkweed whatsoever. So that's the first thing that I'll say. The next thing is, how do we reduce that? And I think talking to nurseries, if you can, is a great way to start. Asking them questions. Do they use pesticides on their plants? Do they use neonics in particular? Those are some of the biggest offenders. Asking what they know about it. And if they don't know, asking them to look into it. Starting that conversation is a great way to bring people in. And I'd really encourage you to start.
And Christine, we lost you there. If you could still hear us, you totally dropped off. She left us with a cliffhanger, right? We'll give her a second, see if she can't get back on there. We all love technology, right? Yes. And if she's not able to hop back on, we could just go ahead and, hey, Debbie.
Hey, yeah. And we may have more, since we're at the Q&A at this point,
Right.
We may have better luck with our Zoom office hours.
That's what I was thinking of. So we
Yeah.
could just all decide to hop on over there a few minutes. Or the office hours start at 2:30, right? Is the official time?
Yes. Yeah. And the announcements, so you have time for those few announcements with the shenanigans, and then hop into the office hours. But I'll let you close out.
There we go. Yeah.
Good timing on the tech for her.
Yeah, I know. If it's going to happen, at least it happened at the very end. So
exactly.
So yeah, for those of y'all who are on, Christine will have office hours at 2:30. So you're happy to hop on there. Also at 2:30 is that shenanigans with Alex and Sydney. Have a chance to win prizes and see who won prizes and things with them. Don't forget to take just a minute or two to fill out the session evaluation and let us know what you think there. And after the office hours, the next round of new talks does start at 3. So you got some time to work with there. And as always, if you want to rewatch part of the program or the whole thing, it'll be on the Socio app for the entire year. So thanks for hanging in there with us. And Julie and Tammy, sorry, didn't quite get to all the questions you had on there, but just hop on over to the office hours at 2:30 and have a good afternoon, everyone.